job. He's like, what do I do now? Thank you, Ethan. I'm so glad that our young people are involved in worship here at Heart of Longmont. Join me in prayer. God, as we share in the message this morning, we ask that you would open our hearts, our minds, our spirits, that you would renew us, inspire us, send us back into the world, new people. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Magi were actually astrologers, so that's part of what they believe. So you were actually onto something. But I have to tell you that I've been giggling at myself. That's how pathetic I can be. I found this hilarious joke, and I've been dying to tell it to you. So, I've been gone, I didn't preach 1 week. I have like 7 sermons today. So, okay, there was this woman, there were these 2 cars, and they were at a stoplight, and the light was green. Now, just think of which person you are in this story. And the person didn't go. And you're behind him and you're like, come on, let's go. I have to be honest, I tend to be the person who didn't go, and people are behind me like, come on, pay attention. Well, this woman is behind this guy, and she's honking and she's ranting and she's raving and she's doing all kinds of angry gestures and cussing and swearing, and all of a sudden the light turns yellow and he goes and it's red again, and she's even angrier, and all of a sudden there's a knock on her door, and it's a police officer. And he arrests her, and she's sort of taken aback, and he takes her down to the police station, and he books her and puts her in the booking place, and she's so confused that she doesn't have anything in her to ask what's going on. And finally, they bring her back out, and they bring her to the police officer, and the policeman just says, gosh, I'm really sorry, there was a mistake, but you see, I pulled behind your car while you were blowing your horn, and you were flipping that guy off, and you were cussing a blue streak at the car in front of you, and then I noticed these bumper stickers on your car that said, what would Jesus do? Follow me to Sunday school, and there was a chrome-plated Christian fish emblem on your trunk, so I naturally assumed you had stolen the car. That is so funny. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I feel like that should be my sermon and we should move on, but oh gosh. Well, I read a quote that said, what good is it to me if Mary gave birth to Christ 20 centuries ago and I don't give birth to Christ in my person, in my culture, in my time? And now, as we find ourselves on Epiphany, I wonder, what does it actually mean as we're about to pack up Christmas, if you will? What does it mean for Christ to be born in me or in you? What does it mean for Christ to be born in us? Really, this is a season of mystery, and I'm about to start a new sermon series, and I'm going to encourage you in the next several weeks to engage in spiritual disciplines of mystery, of curiosity, and of awe. I want you to think of those as spiritual disciplines. I read a quote this week about this idea of Jesus being born into the world anew each day here with us now, that said, in the midst of often bleak reality of this world, in the quiet stillness, and in the chaotic wildness of life, God comes among us in the person of Christ, becomes flesh of our flesh and bone of our bone, heart of our hearts and soul of our souls, to dwell among us. One of the deep truths, it goes on to say, of Christmas is that somehow, in the innocence and weakness of a newborn child, God and humanity become linked, joined in a way never before experienced, never to be separated again. Centuries ago, Meister Eckhart wrote, "We are all meant to be mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born." So this is a season as we go into the new year of Jesus being born again each and every day. in our lives. And so I'm starting this sermon series with this thinking person's faith, if you will. And what a perfect opportunity to begin it, as I'm going to be looking at religion and science on Epiphany. I think so often we have decided that we have to have faith over here and all these other things over there, and they're mutually exclusive rather than interchangeable. And I love that Deanna had been cross-stitching. Where's Deanna? She's out there somewhere. She's over there. She's a cross-stitcher. And she had it on, didn't you have it on Christmas Eve, I think? And she said, I have this cross-stitch, and it says, love is love, women's rights are human rights, Black Lives Matter, kindness is everything, no human is illegal. And at the bottom, it says science is real. And I said, can I have that to have during my sermon series as I talk about a thinking person's church, a time for us to really wrestle with some of these questions that we have posed and that we wrestle with as people of faith. And today we're starting with this idea that science is real. And so often when there's conflict in science and religion, it starts with reading Genesis 1 through 3. That is sort of at the heart of this dialogue and this discussion. It's how we see and perceive and understand and interpret these particular chapters. And in these chapters, there are two creation stories, two distinct stories. The first, Genesis 1, is this beautiful, 1 through 2 is this beautiful chapter, a story. It's poetry. It's a litany. It's a creed. And it is absolutely beautiful. And it describes the creation story and God speaking everything into existence. And then you get to chapter 3, and there's this narrative story about these two human beings and why they need each other. I was thinking of when Paul was talking about forming a new group. It goes right back to this beautiful story where Adam and Eve, which, by the way, are symbolic names. We're going to learn more about it in my Bible study on Tuesday if you want to dig deeper. They're symbolic names. They're not meant literally Adam and literally Eve, but they're meant to be that we need each other in community, that we are created to be companions, helpers along the way, one with the other. And when we read these chapters as science and history, or as they say, if you know creationists, my husband's family is, my two sister-in-laws go every year to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, and every time we visit, my husband has his PhD in physics, they argue with him about how can you be a scientist when you're a Christian? And it's no fun, by the way. After 28 years, it's the same argument. I'm like, you all just stop it. but there's this big, in the Creation Museum, it says that as the eyewitness account from the only eyewitness, that is how creation is to be understood, literally 1 through 7 days. And when we see it that way, and I always say this to my sister-in-laws, and they ignore me, but we miss the point. I believe I miss the beauty and the profound nature of the stories in these powerful chapters. So if you read it literally, everything was created in 7 days. The earth and its plants were created before the sun, by the way. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I do know that that's problematic. And then if you add up all the genealogies, you realize what we're going to find, as Sir Isaac Newton found, or actually the Archbishop James Ussher found in 1650, he published his summary findings, was that the earth was created around the year 4004 BCE. So when you look at a world that some 6,000, however many years old, created literally in 7 days, it's going to be in conflict with science and how we understand science. But what if Genesis 1 through 3 isn't a statement of history and science? What if it's a statement of faith? What if it's expressing what those particular persons saw about the world around them. And instead of a statement of science or history, they were making a statement of theology, a statement about God. In the beginning, God. And God said, and it happened, and it was and is good. When you go through this beautiful litany, this poetry, this refrain, it becomes about everything derives its existence from this sacred, from this holy. Not that God put a science lesson at the beginning of this book about our faith, but that God said it was good, that that's the fundamental truth. That is a statement of faith. That's not a statement necessarily of science. And what if Genesis 2 and 3 was not so much a history of the ancient people of Adam and Eve with symbolic names, but was a teaching about ourselves as we make our way through our life, through our journeys, that we need each other. I believe that to the core of who I am. We need God and we need each other. We need companions. We need helpers along our journey of life. And it also teaches us about the struggles in life, the temptations, if you will. And when we find ourselves lost, missing the mark, paradise is lost. In many ways, these are the important messages of Genesis 1 through 3. And to understand this as the story of our faith journey with God, there's no real conflict I see between science and religion. I found this fascinating. It was Christmas Eve 1968 when more humans heard the reading of Genesis 1 at one time than any other time before. People were glued to the television sets around the world on Christmas Eve. Anyone be willing to admit that they were? Yeah? You remember? I'm evoking some memories. To see something remarkable that was about to happen. And it was Apollo 8 as it was circling around the moon. And it was the first time that human beings had been around the moon. And they didn't land as they were orbiting around the moon and saw the sun rise on the earth. And they had been thinking, what should we say to the world at that moment? And here's what they agreed on, that they would share Genesis 1 through 10. Here's just a little bit. Take a look.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
And why did they read Genesis 1 through 10? I believe it wasn't because they were trying to make a point, okay, the earth was created in 7 days. Instead, it was at seeing this amazing sight that no other human being had seen, seeing how small our world was and how small we are compared to the vastness of the universe. I think that they thought that poetry was the most appropriate thing that they could read. In the beginning, God created everything and said, let there be light, and it is good. I am reminded of the verse that Buzz Aldrin read in 1969. He was in the lunar capsule that landed on the moon. And listen, I mean, this is just amazing to me. They brought communion to the moon. As they took out their snacks, he broke out communion. I mean, how holy and sacred. And as they took communion, he read these words from Psalm 8:3. When I look at your heavens, imagine they're on the moon sharing Holy Communion. He's reading these words. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established. What are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? That gives me chills to imagine that experience. He was on the moon and he knew everything about science. But when he was looking at the heavens, he was thinking, how great are you, O God? Or I think of Jim Irwin, who was on Apollo 15, and in his autobiography, he wrote this: before the flight, I was really not a religious man. I believed in God, but I really had nothing to share. But when I came back from the moon, I felt so strongly that I had something that I wanted to share with others, that I established high flight in order to tell all people everywhere that God is alive, not only on earth, but also on the moon. What powerful reminders that it doesn't need to be science and faith, but together it's beautiful. I guess you could make all these scientific discoveries and say, I just don't need God anymore. I've got it all figured out. But I read over and over of scientists saying, science is the love language of God. In fact, one mathematician was fighting with another physicist, and she was saying, math is the love language of God. And the physicist was saying, no, physics is the love language of God. I thought, now that's an interesting thing to be fighting over. But see, for me, God permeates everything that exists. God is everywhere and is always at work in everything. The sense of holy, the sense of sacred, even in evolution and everything, somehow is a part of the process. I don't know how. Remember back to the beginning, that spiritual discipline of mystery, of curiosity, of awe? See, I believe God is the architect, the engineer, the mathematician, the physicist, the biologist. In the beginning, God, and it is good. To me, everything that science uncovers leaves me in awe of the God of the universe. Today, as I said, is Epiphany. What better way to talk about science in faith on the day when these magi went searching for the Christ child by looking to the heavens and the stars. My family and I have been in Mexico for the last several days, and on the last night of our trip, we took a little sunset cruise, just our family out to watch the sunset on the water. I love sunsets. And we were able to watch, and it was a beautiful night, and the sun set, and as the sun set, the captain turned around, and I was standing up front with the young woman who was our guide. And she, in her broken English, and me, in my very broken Spanish, were doing our best to have a conversation. And all of a sudden, she looked up and she gasped. And she pointed. And she said, I think, do you call it Orion's belt? And she pointed at the three stars. And she said to me, when I was a child, my parents, we celebrated this day. It was called, I said, Epiphany? Yes, yes. And she said, every year we would go out on the day of Epiphany. And she said, we weren't really religious people, but on that day we would look to the stars. And my parents would say, see, those are the same stars that the Magi searched for the Christ child. And today, she said, I believe they're the Magi, reminding us that there is something bigger than you and me. How beautiful our world is. How much we need each other. Join me in prayer. Gracious God, on this day, this first Sunday of the new year, we give thanks for the new beginnings, for the reality that you are born in us every day and that you challenge us to be light. God, we ask that you would help us to have spirits just as the Magi, always searching for you, always believing that there is something beautiful, reminding us of those words, and it was good. As we gather in this holy time to partake in this holy meal, we know you are with us. And we are reminded on that night where Jesus gathered with his beloved. And he took the bread and he broke it, and he said, just as his body would be broken for them, he said, take and eat and remember. Remember my life, my message. Do this in remembrance of me. Then when the supper was over, he took that last cup in the Passover meal, and he reminded them that it was the cup of the new covenant. It was a cup of forgiveness. He said, take and drink of this often, and remember me. So as we come forward today, O God, and partake in this holy meal of communion, we ask that you would make us one with you, one with each other, and one with all of the world. Amen.